I'm John Lippett. We are going to record this, as you just know, so just be aware of that. We will post the recording on our website and we will send all of you the link to it so you can share it with your friends and colleagues who weren't able to join us this morning. Um, I'll be moderating today. I'm a member of Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts, or PDM's leadership team. Um, just a couple procedural things. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will also use the chat to share links, but we do ask that you not use the chat for side conversations because that can be distracting and make it more difficult to pull the questions and links out of the chat. For those of you who don't know, Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts, that's sponsoring this forum, has been doing these forums on roughly a monthly basis for what is it, 5 years now, I think? I've lost track, actually. We were founded in 2003. We were volunteers on Bob Reich's campaign for governor here in Massachusetts. And after that campaign was over, we wanted to maintain the progressive infrastructure rather than sort of having it wither away in between each campaign or each campaign year. We are an all volunteer group. We are statewide here in Massachusetts, and we are focused specifically and solely on state and local policies and elected positions. You can go to our website at progressivedemsofmass.org to get more information and also to see the recordings of all our previous forums. Our forum today is a particularly exciting one and particularly relevant. It's about tax cut and tax caps. Why are we doing this, basically? And we hope to do four things here today. To explain the specifics of the two ballot initiatives that look like they're headed for the ballot in November, one that would cut the income tax and the other that would cap state revenue. Secondly, to explain their impacts on the state budget and state programs and services that the state budget funds, if they were to pass. Third, to provide context of who's behind this effort and why they're doing it. And fourth, of course, to share with all of you what activists are doing and what all of us can do as activists to push back against this. We're lucky to have three wonderful panelists here with us today who can bring a wealth of expertise and experience to this discussion. Very briefly, their backgrounds: Phineas Baxenall is the senior analyst and advocacy director at the Mass Budget and Policy Center, also known as Mass Budget. His focus is on transportation and tax revenue, along with unemployment and the earned income tax credit. He previously directed the Transportation and Tax and Budget Program at the the nationwide PIRG, Public Interest Research Group, and its network of 30 state affiliates, of which we have one here in Massachusetts. And prior to that, he was at the Kennedy School and a teaching fellow at Harvard. We are also joined by Jessica Tang, who is the president of the American Federation of Teachers of Massachusetts, which represents 25,000 educators and staff working in public schools, universities, libraries, and health offices across the state. Prior to being elected AFT president in 2024, she was the president of the Boston Teachers Union for 7 years. And she began her career as an educator in 2005 as a middle school teacher in the Boston Public Schools. As an educator, and through her statewide and national leadership roles in community activism, she's a powerful force for a more equitable public education system. And third, we have Peter Enrich with us. Peter is a longtime member of PDM's leadership team, a driving force behind PDM, and in the interest of full disclosure, he's an emeritus professor at the University of Northeastern School of Law and is a real expert on state and local government, and particularly tax and revenue policy. He frequently advises state and local governments and advocacy groups who are working on state and local fiscal policy issues. So with those brief introductions, I'd just like to dive right in. And I'm wondering, Phineas, can you kick us off by describing for us the income tax rate cut question and what it would do and what its distributional impact would be on residents here in Massachusetts, taxpayers in Massachusetts?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here. My title, by the way, is changed. We hired a full-time advocacy director, so now I'm just I direct our research and policy analysis at Mass Budget, where I've been for about 10 years, and I'm very proud that both Jessica and Peter are board members of Mass Budget and really mean a lot to us as an organization that works on providing analysis on tax and budget issues, both for kind of the inside legislators and their staff, and also for activists, unions, and community groups to make social change happen. And we were really uh, you know scared, I guess is the word, to see these these two ballot questions. The first one, which I'll talk about here, is it sounds very simple and innocuous, but what it is it's a cut of the income tax from 5% to 4%, which is a fifth or 20% of the income tax that we would receive as a state. The the revenue that you get is proportional to the rates that you charge. So, in a just a simple way, it would mean, a fifth of all the income tax that we receive as a state, and income tax is the single biggest source of revenue for the state of Massachusetts. We're slated to get about $25 billion of personal income tax this year. So the expected cut is about $5 billion. That's the back of the envelope, but when it's been calculated through the complex simulation models of places like the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, they come out with the same figure. We are talking about a $5 billion cut. And you know, uh, anytime there's a sort of a wrinkle in the revenue, like, oh no, revenue's a few hundred million back or something, it suddenly becomes a state of austerity in Massachusetts. So 5 billion is just it is a scope of things that is really just hard to even digest what that would mean for state government to lose that revenue. It obviously won't happen. It wouldn't be like a 7.5% cut everywhere or something like that. There are things like, the interest on the state's debt that will still be paid. There's things like, a lot of the money that we get in our budget is through reimbursements from Medicaid and such. So those areas would be affected quite differently. There are certain areas that will feel it the hardest. We know from the last recession, from after the Great Recession, that it was areas like local aid, support for schooling, local aid, higher education, human services that were hit hardest. And that could likely be the case again if this happened. And the 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 massive cuts that happened in 2009, 2008, those were a little over $3 billion. So we are talking about something of a higher scale. Even if you inflation adjust that, this is a much bigger scale of things, and it would come on top of the cuts that we're getting from the federal government. So this is something where the kind of the fiscal pain, which would then translate into public, cuts to public programs that would translate into real human pain, is uh, is really, really, really acute. And um, the while the pain would be felt across the whole state and most acutely by people who are most vulnerable, the sort of benefits of that tax cut would not be evenly spread. For the top 1% of earners, it would be over 31,000, almost $32,000 a year worth of tax benefit. So a real big chunk of money for those in the top 1%, who average about $3.9 million in taxable income a year. Um, for the bottom 80%, we're talking about, I think it was $543 a year, which is, not insignificant, not nothing, but is really pales compared to what it means to, lose, support for your schools, lose support for the basic kind of social services. And for people on the bottom 20%, it's $44 a year would be the benefit on average. So really, really almost nothing. Um, so we're talking about a really painful cut if this thing would pass. It would be phased in over 3 years if it happened, but it would reach that $5 billion amount by that year three. The opponents for it claim that it would uh, not have that amount because of what we've heard before, what we heard from the Trump tax cuts, we heard from the Reagan tax cuts that, if you got this supply side economics that if you make a tax cut, you're going to see such huge, enormous increases in economic growth that, you won't, it'll actually pay for itself. And we know from the huge deficits that happened after the Reagan tax cuts, we know from the huge deficits that happened after the Trump tax cuts that this is pure, fairy tale, should be completely debunked, but we're going to hear this story in the future. So let me stop there, but it's something really serious. So I'm really glad to be able to talk to this group about it.
Great. Thank you so much, Phineas. I think that really lays out the scale of what the damage would be and also who really benefits from it. So, Peter, can we turn to you to talk to us a little bit about the other ballot question, which would cap state revenue?
So yeah, thanks, Phineas, and great to see some familiar and some new faces here. Um, so the tax cap initiative, these are both brought to you by the same cast of anti-government, anti-tax right-wing groups, and we'll talk about that a little later. The tax cap initiative takes a measure that a similar cast of conservative, anti-tax, anti-government groups first brought to us by initiative back in the 1980s, when they introduced and passed a tax cap measure, sometimes referred to by the chapter of the general laws. It's codified in as the 62F cap. And what that cap did, that was enacted back in 1986, it said, let's take the present level of state tax revenues and let's say they can't grow faster than the annual growth in wages and salaries. And if they do grow faster than wages and salaries, then the excess over that cap will be returned to income tax taxpayers. The interesting thing, this was a measure that was crafted by those of you who remember it, Citizens for Limited Taxation and the Mass High Tech Council, and the same cast of characters we're dealing with again now. They drafted something that they thought was going to be a rigid, rigorous cap on state taxes. Well, what's happened? Well, over the ensuing 40 years, we exceeded that tax cap twice. Once in the early years, just by a small sum of money. And then one other time in the middle of the COVID pandemic when a bunch of things conspired to cause revenues to jump in one year. Part of it was timing of some certain measures. Part of it's a complicated story. Phineas actually can do a good job of telling more of that story if we want to get to that later. But so in 2022 rather, $3 billion was returned to taxpayers. But other than that, it has never applied because taxes have not grown that rapidly. In fact, taxes have not even kept up with the growth of wages and salaries. Wages and salaries, by the way, is a conservative measure. Wages and salaries grow much slower than overall personal income grows. So if the cap had been indexed to personal income, which is a much more reasonable measure, we would have been even further below the cap now. So what's happening now? The same groups have come back and they say, we think we need to make the tax cap more extreme. And they do it by two significant changes to the way the tax cap is calculated. The first one, and the one that would wreak true havoc, is instead of annually growing from a given base, the base from 1985, I think it is, and growing it by some conservative measure, they instead say the allowable revenues in a given year will be the actual revenues from the previous year grown by that same wage and salary measure. Now, the reality is that state taxes fluctuate rather considerably across the business cycle. And what this would do is it says if there was one year when state tax revenues were lower because of a recession, because of a dip in the stock market that affects taxes on capital gains sharply, then the next year the cap would be set by that low year. And we're working on doing some modeling of this, but our understanding is that that could often produce a sharp reduction in revenues for the next year after a low tax year. That's not the end of it, though, because in that next year, the excess revenues would be being refunded to taxpayers, which would mean that the revenues in that next year would be reduced as well, so that the allowable revenues in the following year would be reduced as well. So the overall effect of this would be a downward ratcheting of taxes that, again, we're trying to do some modeling to figure out exactly how extreme it would be, but it appears that over time it would gradually shrink and shrink and shrink the allowable state tax revenues. The second change that it introduces is, you all remember the Fair Share Amendment. Many of you helped us to get it enacted. It's bringing in close to $3 billion a year, and it is explicitly outside of the existing revenue cap. It was, the voters voted for it as a new additional revenue. We wrote it right into the Constitution, and so it is not presently affected by or counted in the tax cap. Well, guess what the initiative would do? It would include fair share revenues in the taxes that are subject to the tax cap. Now, that wouldn't be quite as catastrophic as you might think, because since we're setting allowable revenues by an index on the previous year's revenues, and since fair share revenues are already in previous year's revenues, they're already in the base. So it wouldn't, and again, this is a really complicated issue. The initiative is clumsily drafted. And if I were a lawyer representing high wealth clients, I would argue that what it says is in the first year that the initiative takes effect, fair share revenues are not in the base, so they create a huge excess. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm seeing a question for someone asking what the Fair Share Amendment was. That's the amendment that added the 4% additional tax on incomes in excess of $1 million that we passed by ballot initiative 4 years ago. So there's at least an argument that it would cause basically all of fair share revenues to be excess revenues. The proponents say, no, 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 that's not what they meant. But there's still a big problem from including the fair share revenues in the cap. Fair share revenues are very largely driven by capital gains on stock exchange, on sales of stocks. That's a very volatile piece of the tax revenue. And so to the extent this new way of doing the cap plays on the volatility, that there are some years that revenues are down and others that they're back up to normal, including fair share revenues in the revenues subject to the cap would just increase the extent to which the cap would be triggered by ordinary fluctuations in the business cycle and would again gradually shrink available tax revenues. It's hard to estimate exactly how much impact that will have on top of the tax cut initiative, but we anticipate that in many years it would further reduce revenues, probably by several additional billions of dollars. And so the effects of it would be dramatic and drastic as well, although harder to predict, harder to model. So maybe I'll stop there and let us move on to the other questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Peter. Phineas, I know Mass Budget is working on a model to model this tax cap thing. Any update from that, or is that still a work in progress?
So work in progress. We've been waylaid by other things, and I'll just um, augment what Peter was saying about this sort of ratchet effect. We've been trying to figure out the best way to explain it. It's almost like how people's stomachs expand or contract, but this would make it so that when your stomach, if you were sick or something and your stomach contracted a little bit, it would say it's not allowed to grow back to its previous size. So every time you had a kind of a bad revenue year, it would starve the public sector a little bit more until that would just be we'd have to cut all kinds of programs to accommodate that. I don't know. We're figuring out the best ways to kind of communicate that effect, but that's the idea of what it would do over time.
Great. Thanks. Thank you very much. Jessica, can we turn to you and can you talk to us a little bit about if these were to pass, what the impact would be on the state budget and on education and other state and local services and supports that we all count on?
Sure. Thanks. Peter and Phineas have really laid out the detailed kind of explanation of what these two ballot questions would do. But in short, we're looking at, in summary, around $7 billion or more of lost state revenue. And that would be catastrophic for so many reasons. Again, that's like 20% of our whole state revenue, right? And so we are already experiencing in a lot of our districts and a lot of our municipalities budget shortfalls. And the MMA actually came out with a really great report about, I think it's called the perfect storm. Remind me, I will look it up and we can send it to you all. But it kind of explains why so many places across the Commonwealth right now are facing budget shortfalls. And this is impacting everything from our ability to keep libraries open. We almost had a couple of our libraries close. We represent actually not just the K through 12 educators in a lot of districts, but also our MLSA, which is the Massachusetts School Staff Librarian and Staff Association, as well as higher ed. And whether it's pre-K libraries, higher ed, or public sector, everyone's facing layoffs and cuts right now in lots of different ways. And it's been complicated also by the federal government, of course, cutting grants to higher ed and cutting funding as well. And we recently in the K through 12 space learned that we are actually getting less Title I funds. Title I funds are for students who are considered living in poverty. And so just to put some numbers into the kind of cuts that we're already facing, in Boston alone, it's a $53 million budget deficit for our schools. In Framingham, it's $8 million. In Lynn, it's $12.1 million. In Chelsea, it's $11.6 million. And for example, last night in Chelsea, there were over 400 people who protested at a school committee meeting because they're looking to cut 76 positions. Again, that's 10% of the whole staff in the school district. These are reading specialists. These are special education teachers. You name the position, paraprofessional, art, etc., and they're getting cut. And this has been compounded also by our decline in enrollment due to the ICE policies and presence of ICE. And so nationally, there's already been a downward decline in school-age populations, but it's actually been hugely exacerbated because of ICE. So again, some examples in Boston alone, our student population dropped by 1,600 students. The previous years, it's actually been stable and actually even a little bit of growing. And then in 1 year, dropping 1,600 students. And Lynn, it's 435. And Chelsea, that's 321 students. But again, all across the state, even in Pittsfield, where they were down 180 students, that's like the population of whole schools. And so the prospect of losing, a fifth of our state revenue when we're already facing so many places and I'm just kind of giving the picture of schools losing positions for not just their schools, but also fire, police, a lot of the public services. This would also have huge impacts in terms of access to healthcare. Healthcare is already too expensive. Most plans are going up by 16 or 20% or more. And that also is impacting, by the way, the municipal districts. What we're going to see is more overrides and shifting costs because a lot of these services we still need to provide. But then who is able to access them, and then also who ends up paying for them? It's going to be our local municipalities, and we're going to see more and more overrides trying to maintain those services, and it again will have catastrophic impacts from everything from healthcare to pensions, to teachers and schools, and our students' ability to access opportunities and the staffing that they deserve for their schools. And so that's just laying out a bit of the picture that we're facing here. And again, if we have the Medicaid and Medicare impacts too that are coming, right? The timing of this just really couldn't be worse in terms of all of the budget deficits and fiscal crises we're already facing, and the ones that we know are still coming because of they call it one big beautiful bill. I refuse to call it that. The one big ugly terrible bill. And so those impacts are yet to be seen, and this would again exacerbate those impacts even more with people not being insured, and then emergency rooms, hospitals having to take on a cost because people are still going to get sick and have to get care, right?
Great. Thank you very much. I think we have a good picture of what's going on. So my next question for all three of you, if you want to chime in, is so why is the Mass High Tech Council pushing this? Who's this? What is it? Massachusetts Opportunity Alliance that they've formed to advocate for it. So what's going on here? What's behind all this?
Yeah, this would be a great time to put the MHTC Revealed website that the Raise Up Mass Coalition has put together to show exactly who's actually behind this. But the short version is that these are groups that were upset about the Raise Up Mass Millionaires Fair Share Tax happening and the success of the Raise Up Mass Coalition, and have created these two groups essentially to counter that and take away the positive impacts and the wins that we've had. That's the short version. Finn and Peter, I don't know if you want to weigh in and give a little bit more of the details too.
Yeah, let me say a little bit more. The initiatives are being led by something that's called the Massachusetts Opportunity Alliance, which claims that it's trying to restore and ensure the competitiveness of Massachusetts. And it was formed by three primary groups. The one is the Mass High Tech Council, which has been around for many decades, has continuously been a leading source of anti-tax, anti-government campaigning. They've led a series of initiatives. They've partnered with Citizens for Limited Taxation back in the day that was the leading organization doing it. The Mass High Tech Council itself had some 60-something members, which included a bunch of high-tech industries, a bunch of universities and hospitals and financial institutions that are all connected with high tech in one way or another. But the leadership has been there's been a guy named Chris Anderson who's been the executive director of the High Tech Council since the 80s and has been a prominent leading anti-tax activist. The other two groups behind the Opportunity Alliance are the Pioneer Institute, which is a right-wing think tank that has produced a series of not terribly well-grounded pieces of research arguing for reductions in government on all sorts of fronts for, again, many decades. And the Massachusetts Competitive Partnership, which is a new organization of mainly, its membership is mainly large corporate entities in Massachusetts, who have come together to again push for smaller government, lower taxes. The motivation is complicated. I mean, somebody has described this as there's two basic groups in this Mass Opportunity Alliance. There are the true believers, the anti-tax people who just think that you need to just shrink government and shrink government and shrink government, and that that's going to make for a better world. And then there's another, probably larger group who we're referring to as the blackmailers. They are people who, when you ask them, they say, no, we don't really want to see these initiatives passed. They're too extreme, but we need some way to pressure the legislature to at least do something. What's the something? Well, some of the things that are on the something list is let's completely eliminate the Massachusetts estate tax, which only applies to estates in excess of $2 million dollars and primarily affects very large estates. Um, let's change the unemployment system so that businesses don't have to pay as much in because we won't pay as much out to people who are unemployed. Those are the things that the blackmailers are really looking for, but they're using the threat of something that the legislature and the governor all recognize would be catastrophic. They're hoping that they can get the legislature to agree to do some of these things that they really want in exchange for them backing off and not putting the initiatives on the ballot. So it's a very problematic environment dealing with some very problematic organizations.
And I'll just add to one quick thing too is that they specifically created this new, was it a C6, where they try to hide who is funding it actually. And so that's why we've done a lot of work to try to unveil who it is, because they definitely are trying to hide who the funders are that are putting money into these ballot questions.
And it may be worth noting that we have filed a complaint with the Office of Campaign and Political Finance about exactly that. The Office of Campaign and Political Finance is investigating. This is a tactic that right-wing groups have used before in funding the anti-charter, the pro-charter school initiative a few years ago. They got in deep trouble with Campaign and Political Finance Office. We think that this is a reiteration of exactly the same pattern of trying to hide the flow of the millions of dollars that they've already spent and the millions of dollars that they apparently are prepared to go forward spending.
Just one follow-up question. Ostensibly, this is coming from business groups. Do, how does this benefit the businesses? Or is it really something that just benefits their wealthy executives and investors? Does it benefit their businesses in any way, shape, or form? Or does it hurt their businesses by cutting state investments in education, as Jessica's just pointed out?
It's a great question, John. And the short answer is for the blackmailers, there is a payoff directly for businesses. The things that they would like to get in exchange for withdrawing these ballot questions are things, some of which would directly flow to businesses, like the changes in unemployment insurance. But the initiatives themselves are entirely about the personal income tax and would not affect large businesses directly at all, but would certainly affect their owners and um, highly compensated executives.
If I could just underscore one thing, it's this is this um I don't know if people remember back a few years ago there was what was called the grand bargain where there was a bunch of ballot initiatives from different sides, and the legislature uh, kind of agreed to do certain things like get rid of time and a half for workers who are working overtime. And in return, the retailers took off a sales tax change. And there was these kind of started a pattern where sometimes when people were doing a ballot initiative, what they could want would be not necessarily the ballot initiative, but what they could wring out as a concession by doing a ballot initiative, which they might even concede wouldn't even be the right policy or a helpful policy in the first place, but it gave them a kind of leverage, a kind of, like a hostage for their negotiations. And so what this means insofar as that is the case here and is that in the short term, the best thing that we can be doing is anything that can help make sure that the legislature is not going to make a bargain, that it's not going to kind of negotiate with terrorists on this to give what might be wanted as a concession. If this thing gets to the ballot, then and isn't, disqualified because of the kind of challenges Peter was talking about, which seems like there's a very good chance this is going to be on the ballot, then that's in the more emphasis around, how do we stop this thing from actually passing? But you know, in both cases, sort of people being more educated about the harms that these things would actually produce is really helpful, both because it takes away the leverage in the short term if people know that this thing is a bad thing, and that they're not wanting to see it as something that might pass, and then in the longer term in an actual ballot fight to actually defeat it at the ballot.
I think
Thanks,
it's
Phineas.
oh
Go ahead, Jessica.
well, I just say I think it's worth noting though to your original question, about who this benefits, is that even some groups that typically are not aligned with us and the leaders of them do find this to be problematic. So, we've met with the leaders of, the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, Chamber of Commerce, the Mass Business Roundtable, and AIM, and they all don't think this is a good idea either. I mean, they have to, I think, represent their their corporations, their businesses, but um, they don't actually think this helps with competitiveness, I think, in Massachusetts either. And that's increasingly, I think, becoming the position even of business groups and small businesses too. And so there's an opportunity here, and this might be a good segue actually into what we've been doing to fight this in the multiple
Perfect.
different
Go
ways
ahead.
we've been
Yes.
tackling it. And so, Peter mentioned, I think it was either Peter or Phineas, sorry, I forget which one, that we've been, asking organizations that are part of the Mass High Tech Council to leave because they pay dues to be a part of it. And so we've been saying, why would you want to be a part of something that would have like such a harmful impact on your own institution, particularly in higher ed that's facing a lot of cuts right now and funding challenges. And so to date, we've been able to get 11 institutions to leave the Mass High Tech Council, the latest one being M&T Bank. And M&T Bank is interesting because they said, they want to help stop it as well. And so I think if you do have any relationships with any of the organizations that are on that list of Mass High Tech Council, helping to, make those phone calls and saying, hey, we don't think you should be a part of this initiative. It'd be harmful. You should leave the Mass High Tech Council or leave the Mass Opportunity Alliance. That has been helpful and it has been making an impact. But there's also, in addition to the challenge with the OCPF challenge, also there's a legal challenge. Peter obviously should talk more about that, but we found three of our AFT Mass members are part of plaintiffs in that case. And then there's the activism too. And so joining one of our protests, we were actually going to have a lot of protests at M&T Bank before they pulled out, and then we called them off because when they found out about this, they dropped out at the right time so that they didn't go forward. But those are some of the ways that we've been trying to fight back. And Peter, do you want to talk more about the lawsuit?
Well, so yeah, let me first add a little more about the effort to go after organizations that have been in the High Tech Council, for other good reasons. It's a good networking opportunity. There are good resources there, but who haven't really been thinking about the fact that the High Tech Council is the leading group doing these anti-tax, anti-government measures. And those are things that they don't want to be part of. So organizations like Massport and a number of universities, both public and private, who had long been members of the High Tech Council, have already withdrawn. If somebody can post in the chat the link to the MHTC Revealed website, in response to our efforts, the High Tech Council removed from its website the list of its members and of its board. So we have produced our own website reporting who the members are and who has withdrawn. But take a look at that list. If there are ones where you know somebody who's in an executive position, reach out to them, explain to them that they're on the wrong side, that they're hurting their own state and their own businesses. The Raise Up Coalition, of which PDM and AFT are both active members, is coordinating these planned demonstrations at various of the members of the High Tech Council to try and leverage more of them to leave. The next set of demonstrations are going to be a week from today against Fidelity, where we hear that there is some interest, some concern about their membership. And so we want to heat that up for them. So if you check on the Raise Up website, there's information about those demonstrations and how to get connected to them. We're also going to attempt the same kind of effort with members of the Massachusetts Competitive Partnership, which again are large businesses that depend on having state services, an educated workforce, all of the things that government provides, and reminding them that they really shouldn't be trying to do extreme tax cutting and blackmailing of the state. So that's one piece. The lawsuit, just very briefly, turns out that as many of you are familiar with the ballot initiative process, the sponsors draft the legislation, file it with the Attorney General. The Attorney General then writes a summary, which is what appears on the ballot on the initiative petitions that many of you have helped collect signatures on. It's the summary that will appear on the ballot if the question goes as far as the ballot next November. In this case, the Attorney General's summary turns out to be seriously wrong. It says that with regard to the tax cut initiative, it says that the tax cut initiative would apply to wages and salaries and dividends and interest, but would not apply to capital gains. That happens to be flatly false. It appears that the proponents of the measure encouraged the Attorney General's office to misunderstand some complexities about the drafting, which led the Attorney General to write a summary, which is just simply mistaken. The Constitution requires that the summary be fair and concise, and in previous cases where the court has found the summary not to be fair and concise, it has stricken a measure, in one case, a measure that had already gone to the voters and been approved by the voters. And the court said, well, but the summary was completely inadequate, so it doesn't suffice. This is the first case we're aware of where the summary has been flatly wrong about an important feature. We think there's a fairly good chance that the Supreme Judicial Court may strike it from the ballot, but we can't count on that. We won't know that till probably June. We need to be moving ahead, pushing back. There are two critical places that we need to be pushing back. One, and Phineas talked about this a couple of minutes ago, we need to be telling our legislators, don't make a deal. They have to talk to legislative leadership and tell leadership, don't make a deal. You don't deal with blackmailers. If we make a deal this time, they're just going to come back and do the same thing every 2-year cycle. We need to stand firm and oppose this. If we succeed in opposing it and it has to go to the ballot, we think at that point the blackmailers and the true believers may split, and there may not be quite as deep support for the ballot question as they fantasize. But then the second thing we need to do is we need to start building the grassroots network to defeat these questions if they do go to the ballot. And so what we hope you're going to all do is A, call your legislators and tell them, please talk to leadership and tell them not to deal with these blackmailers. Second, start talking to your friends and neighbors. You can share the video of this forum, tell them about these ballot measures, tell them about how dangerous they are and how damaging they would be, and start preparing people to stand up to fight back.
And I guess I heard a third thing, Peter. Well, actually, before I go there, Jessica, I believe your AFT has created some like flyers or posters that highlight some of the issues with this, and I'm wondering if those would be something that we could share as a follow-up to this to help people start to get the message out to them so that they can then share it with their friends and colleagues, as Peter just mentioned.
Sure. So yeah, we actually I should not fully take credit for it because it was actually based on this really important and great report that Mass Budget put together with some really important visuals and graphs. And so all we did is we pulled from that report and turned them into a version that you can share on social medias. I did send them yesterday. I don't know if you got them.
Yep.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So feel free
So,
to share them and send them out. Um, but I do want to give credit to Mass Budget because that's where the data and the visuals and the graphics came
I
from.
know.
And I hate to do this. I apologize, but I think I told you I'm at a school and I'm about to be at an event, and they're all congregating like in front of me, and I really should go because they see me and they're like wondering like why I'm not getting out of the car. And so apologies. I'm visiting a school where we're with some legislators and United Way to advocate for more community schools as a strategy for school improvement. And so I'm so sorry. I was trying to stay on until 11, but I keep
No,
getting kind of
no,
like
no problem,
summoned
Jessica.
over.
Go do your real job. You do important work every day. Please go do it. And thank you for letting us share those infographics you put together. They're great. We will
Thank
do
you.
that.
Yeah, no problem. All
Take care.
right. Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
so
All
much for
That's
joining
okay.
us.
right, take care.
The one other strategy, Peter, that's been mentioned that and Phineas, I wanted to follow up on and see if there's any more detail is to be aware of any links we have, and we'll share in the follow up to this um, links to the lists of the members of these organizations. So to think about whether you have any links to them. So for example, for me, Brandeis University used to be one of the members of the Mass High Tech Council. I'm a graduate of the Heller School at Brandeis. I still go back there each spring to teach a course or teach a class as a guest lecturer. So I reached out to my friends there and said, so who are the people we need to talk to at Brandeis about this? And Peter and I got connected with woman who heads up the business school there, who was the decision maker on this, and we convinced her in one call that they should resign from the Mass High Tech Council, which they did. So if any of you have those kinds of connections, think about them and reach out. Feel free to reach out to me or any of us to help you if you have a connection that might be able there. And then also to just keep your eyes open for any demonstrations that are happening, like the ones that targeted very successfully the M&T Bank, maybe one's Fidelity. If you have a Fidelity office or a Fidelity customer, you might want to participate and support those efforts as well. So I guess those are three action items that we have. Anything else that we should be thinking about doing or anything to add to
John,
those
John,
action items we've identified?
John, that MHTC Revealed site that is now in the chat
Oh,
has the
great.
list of the High Tech Council members. For the list of Mass Competitive Partnership members, you can just go to their website. They haven't taken it down yet, and it lists their board members, and they are associated with, many of the large corporations that are active in Massachusetts. So taking a look at those and following up with any contacts you can is tremendously valuable. And one other thing that's worth at least just mentioning briefly, Jessica talked about all of the other challenges that we're facing on the budget front, largely emanating from the Trump administration. And so, in addition to fighting off these ballot initiatives, there are at least a couple of other important things that are in legislative play that people should be aware of. Another one that's critical in pushing back on the Trump administration's measures is in the One Big Horrible Bill Act from last summer. There were a whole series of large corporate tax breaks at the federal level. Um, Giveaways to businesses, to large businesses primarily. Um, and Massachusetts bases its corporate tax directly on the federal corporate tax. So unless the legislature acts, we are automatically adopting about $500 million of big tax breaks to the very same big businesses who are getting those breaks at the federal level for programs that everyone in the Massachusetts delegation in Congress voted against because they're terrible policy. But here they're going to just automatically take effect in Massachusetts if the legislature doesn't act. The governor filed a bill that at least puts this issue in front of the legislature, but it's quite unsatisfactory. What it does is it delays implementation of these corporate tax cuts, some for 1 year, some for 2 years, but would let them all take effect by next year. And that simply makes no sense. The legislature is considering this right now. They're going to have to act on it very rapidly because some of those cuts apply to, in fact, the most expensive year is tax year 2025, where businesses are already starting to prepare their tax returns. And if we're going to decouple from these measures for 2025, the legislature is going to have to act in the next few weeks. The legislature understands that. Whether they're going to do only what the governor asked or it's something more remains to be seen. It's a issue worth reaching out to your legislators about and say, please fully, the magic word is decouple. That's one. The other one is one that we've talked about before on these forums and that has been a priority of Raise Up and of Progressive Dems for a number of years, which is a change in our corporate tax system, which we're calling corporate fair share, which would close to a significant extent the ways in which corporations can hide their profits in overseas tax sheltered countries. Not going to try and get into the details of that, but again, the legislature is still considering corporate fair share, sometimes referred to as GILTI. And that's another one. Talk to your legislators, tell them that they need to enact corporate fair share. Those are things that would really help in addition to making sure they are not the same order of magnitude as the two initiatives we're talking about today, but they are serious and important and timely.
I see Gene put a question in the chat about, has Governor Healy said anything about either of these tax revenue cut ballot questions? And I'm not aware that she has. Is anybody else aware that she has?
Yeah, Go ahead,
She
Finn.
spoke out against the rate cut, the one from 5 to 4%, and in actually pretty strong terms. She hasn't followed it up since and hasn't been very public since. But that was a great statement. She hasn't, to my knowledge, said anything about the tax cap ballot initiative.
All right, so another action item, in addition to calling your legislators, contact the governor's office and thank her for opposing the rate cut and ask her to be very vocal about it and ask her to also oppose the revenue cap question.
And not to make a deal.
Yeah.
One of the concerns is she recognizes how catastrophic these measures would be, but is that going to lead her to stand firmly against them, or is it going to lead her to try and make a deal to avoid their full impact? And it's important that she stands firm with us.
And also to another question in the chat or comment, we will uh, send a follow-up email to all of you to provide you a link to the recording of this, and we'll also include links to the information we've mentioned here, and I'll write up a little something that highlights what the strategies are that we would encourage each of you to think about undertaking where you can.
I can also respond quickly to Kim's question in the chat about whether we've reached out to the AG to correct their summary. The short answer is it's way too late to correct the summary, right? 86,000 people have already signed the initiative based on the false summary. The Constitution doesn't make any provision for changing the summary for exactly that reason. Our position is that it is too late, that the only thing they can do is go back and do it again 2 years and get it right and not try and trick the Attorney General into writing a mistaken summary.
And actually, maybe one last question I'll pose, we have just a couple minutes left, is one of the arguments that the proponents make is that the reason people leave Massachusetts is because of high taxes. And therefore, by cutting taxes and reducing state revenue, that we will make Massachusetts more affordable for people and we'll see less outmigration. Phineas or Peter, what would your comments be on? I'm sure Jessica would have a lot to say about that, but what would your comments be on that?
I, I I mean, I think there will always be some anecdote that somebody will come up with, but I think the proof in the pudding is what has happened with fair share revenue, right? They said it's not going to raise the $2 billion that the proponents said. It's going to be much less because the millionaires are going to flee. And it didn't raise the 2 billion, it raised 3 billion. So the in the kind of, the actual revenue that's coming in, the millionaires have not been fleeing. And one of the reasons is that a big advantage of having a ton of money is you get to live where you want. You don't see a few percentage points on your second million changing your whole life. It's a kind of privilege of wealth, and that's not going to change.
The other thing to note is there has been a fair amount of outmigration from Massachusetts. But who is it of? It's of mainly of young people, people in their 20s and 30s. And they aren't leaving because of taxes. They're leaving because they can't afford to buy a house, because they can't afford childcare, because the utility costs are too high, because they can't make a life for themselves here. Those are things that are not getting corrected by reducing taxes. They're going to be corrected by providing the services, using funds to provide affordable childcare, getting housing built, all the things that government is in a position to do if it has the revenues to do it.
Right. Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on, and I think we're right at time. And I'd like to respect and thank everybody for being here and spending your time with us today. And we will be in touch with the recording and other information. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the panel members who were absolutely fantastic. Great information on some complex and also some not so complex issues. But so thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks for having us.
Take care.